The Seattle Seahawks have certainly emerged as one of the most intriguing teams to monitor in this free agency cycle. A lot of chaos surrounding this team, whether it be incoming players or outgoing players. But the one area that I want to pinpoint in terms of how Seattle can be one of the big players this offseason is how they can address some of the needs that have been popping up in the roster through the draft. Obviously, still a lot of free agency left, and they can certainly add through free agency as well as the draft. But I think it's the draft where Seattle certainly need to nail their picks, especially pick number 18, their first pick in the draft. They have a lot of picks due to the business they have already done in free agency, but I do believe that at pick number 18, that will define the tenor of the Seattle draft. And I feel that Seattle is a team that, yes, can continue to build through free agency, but it's not their MO. It's not their identity to be that team that gets aggressive in free agency. Yes, they have made a move with Sam Darnold that proves that they can go out in there and take a swing, take a chance on a certain player, but they are very, very attuned to the draft because that's where they get most of their production from and where they hope to build their roster most importantly. But let's recap some of the moves they have made to get to this position and how in the draft they can address some big needs with that first pick, number 18, in this year's draft. Now, obviously, this past week for Seattle, especially for myself as a Seattle Seahawks fan and for several others in the fan base, can be seen as very rough. We released two of our best receivers in franchise history. Tyler Lockett was released. DK Metcalf was then traded after he requested a trade to Pittsburgh. And then, to make matters worse, a guy in Geno Smith who at the very least could have remained for 2 years, saw out the end of his contract, gets traded to the Raiders, reunites with Pete Carroll, and we were left with a quandary at the QB position. But what do? We went out and signed Sam Darnold, 3 years, $100.5 million deal, $55 million guaranteed. Not necessarily the worst deal, because $55 million accounts for about 1.5 years of Darnold's service. So if he does not play up to the expectations, much like he did in Minnesota, chances are they do cut him, but they are certain that at the very least, Sam Darnold can be a contingency plan. But now you're left with a pretty barren roster, at the very least offensively. Your defense doesn't necessarily need too much improvement, but it's the offense now that looks pretty barren, especially up front. Sam Darnold did come from an environment where a lot of the Vikings' offensive line success stemmed from its tackles, but they do not necessarily have good guards. And that seems to be the problem with Seattle, in that I feel their strength along the offensive line is their tackles, but the less we talk about their injury woes, the better. But the guards, that's where the troubles lie for Seattle. And now, not just at the guard position, but the wide receiver position needs to be addressed. Because now you're down two of your top three receivers in Metcalf and Lockett. JSN's now the presumptive wide receiver 1, but that depth chart looks thin, to the point where your wide receiver 4 was a former cult favorite college football QB in John Reese Plumlee. So that just goes to show how thin they are now at the wide receiver position. Now, obviously, we can talk about how free agency can pan out for Seattle, because certainly there are a lot of players still out there at both offensive guard and wide receiver that Seattle could be in play for. Cooper Kupp could be released very soon, and Seattle could then become a player for his services. There's still a lot of elite guards, yes. A couple guys like Banks, Will Fries, Drew Dalman have already moved, but there's still a couple guys out there that could move to Seattle. But as a Seattle Seahawks fan, I know that we wait patiently for the draft, because we're not a team that every single week of free agency are going to be swinging for big moves, swinging for the fences. John Schneider, for all intents and purposes, is a shrewd GM. It's not going to change with Mike Macdonald at the helm. In fact, I feel that they want to build this team in the mold of Mike Macdonald. That's why they stripped away a lot of the guys that were there in the Pete Carroll era and now want to build both through the draft and free agency. Because interestingly enough, what with all the business they did these past couple of weeks, Seattle now has the most 2026 cap space of any team. And that'll allow them to go in a lot of different directions. Say Sam Darnold doesn't work out like he did in Minnesota this year. If they draft someone in this draft cycle, say as a third round pick, a guy like a Quinn Ewers or a Will Howard, they have a chance to develop him in this offseason, and then next year in 2026 have so much cap space to be able to build around him. And also, next year's draft is going to be one of the most talented, not just in terms of the QBs, but in terms of position groups as well. So, if Seattle do choose to go down, say, a late round QB route this season and pick up a Ewers or Howard, chances are they'll have an opportunity next offseason to build up their roster as well. But say Sam Darnold does well this season and you want to keep him for another year. Don't cut ties with him. And you want to preserve that cap space that you've already got. Then, next cycle, you draft one of the more talented QBs in this 26 class, build him up, as well as add pieces in free agency so that when he takes the reins, he'll have a nice infrastructure around him. So there are a lot of plans that Seattle could take, a lot of paths, a lot of routes. But this year's draft is paramount for getting certain positions right, because right now it is glaringly clear what Seattle need to address. So without further ado, I'm going to get to the full premise of this segment here, talking about how Seattle can set the tone of their draft at pick number 18. Now, they have perhaps some of the most picks of anyone in this year's draft because of what they acquired in those trades with the Raiders and the Steelers. And so I feel like the meat of their draft is going to come in those later rounds, the second round, the third round, maybe even the fourth round. They can find certain players that can add to this team this year. But pick number 18 is pivotal. It's not necessarily the best pick to have in Seattle's situation. However, it very well could be in terms of certain players at certain positions Seattle will be looking at falling to this spot. And so I've selected 4 of them that could fit the profile of what Seattle needs, whether it be along the offensive line or at the wide receiver position, to better bolster their squad for whatever path they choose in these next few years. So let's get into them. Starting off at the offensive line. It's probably the biggest area of concern for Seattle right now, and they have to address it one way or another. And pick number 18 could be the path to setting the tone for building to the trenches this year in Seattle. The first player that I want to mention is perhaps one of the highest risers among the offensive line class over the past couple of weeks, with a couple solid performances in the Senior Bowl and at the Combine. Armand Membu, the 20-year-old out of Missouri. I love this kid. Fantastic frame, fantastic athleticism, great in both pass pro and run protection. I feel can be a mauler when it comes to pass protection, but also be someone who can move smoothly enough to the point where when he's in pass pro, he can handle his business. When he's climbing to the second level in the run game, he can get there. And most importantly, I feel like he's someone who's going to be very active in terms of his balance and agility at the second level. And I think Seattle, with this scheme, may start to trust the run game a little bit more, even though Sam Darnold is not afraid to throw that deep ball. But they need to find someone who has the perfect balance of that agility you need to get to the second level in the run game while also being smooth in the pass game to kind of leverage this offensive line. Membu could be the guy. However, my concerns about him, one, is that he may not get there because of the fact that he's been one of the fastest risers in this draft. His stock has skyrocketed over the past couple of weeks to the point where he could be the first offensive lineman off the board. And a lot of teams picking in, say, the 10 to 15 region could also need an O-lineman like Membu and may take a shot at him. But another thing that I'm concerned about with Membu is his hand usage. I feel like sometimes he gets over aggressive, and in certain moments at the start of the rep, he tends to overextend his hands a little bit and maybe start to second guess a couple things. And that's where Seattle have struggled as of late in recent years, trying to find the right protection for their offensive linemen in terms of how to use their hands. One of the most penalized teams when it comes to, say, holding calls up front. So that's a worry. But if Seattle are able to get him, they will be getting an extremely versatile guy who can kick out to one of the guard positions, but also fill in at tackle if need be. And who knows? If he falls to them, he could be someone who can cover up all the injury woes, fill in for guys like Cross and Lucas and guys of that nature. So I'm looking at Armand Membu as someone who might be a bit of a reach, but if he does fall to us, it would be a fantastic pick. However, the more realistic option, in my opinion, for Seattle is someone in Tyler Booker, who I expect to be in the OT3 range. Tyler Booker is also a phenomenal player when it comes to his athleticism with the build he has. He's a very dense player, very compact, fantastic strength, fantastic length. And I love how he comes off the ball in the run game. Very square in terms of the power he possesses. He excels in using his frame to secure run lanes. And when Seattle might want to pull to the outside in the run game and utilize Kenneth Walker more in that manner, he has enough burst to get there. And I love the fact that he has that anchor that is required in someone who is going to be needed very heavily in the run game. However, he's not as agile as, say, an Armand Membu, and that's a knock on him to the point where he could be someone Seattle's looking at number 18, because if he were just as agile as Armand Membu, he could go as high as I expect Membu to go. But because of the fact he's not necessarily quick of foot, and he's not someone who can often redirect certain rush moves, that's someone who I feel like can fall to Seattle and might be someone who they build up. But he did play, most importantly, in a run-heavy scheme with Alabama that also used a lot of RPOs, which I can see this Clint Kubiak-led offense doing a lot of. And if they're able to get him, he's going to be outstanding in the run game. But it's that agility that is the question mark for me. And he may not be someone who could be as versatile as an Armand Membu. And that's why at this guard position for Seattle, he would be my second pick. But he might just be the guy who falls to us at number 18 because of Membu's strengths and because of his draft stock skyrocketing. Now let's go to the other position of concern for Seattle. A surprising one heading into this draft. Wide receiver. No one expected both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to leave. I did expect Tyler Lockett to be released. It was seemingly time to release him, in my opinion. And once he was released, DK Metcalf probably grew a bit frustrated. The reason why he requested a trade. And most importantly, I would not have expected Seattle to pay him as much as he was looking for. So that's why both of them, rather than just one of them, are gone. But I still think there are some receivers that Seattle could look for to partner with Jackson Smith and Jigba to allow him to assume the role of wide receiver one and complement him perfectly. One of them being Matthew Golden. Matthew Golden is someone who, as a Texas Longhorns fan as well, I was very fond of last year. Really, really versatile player. That's what I see out of him. He can align anywhere you need him. On the outside, in the red zone especially, or in the slot where a lot of his production came from. But make no ands, ifs, or buts about it. You're going to have to scheme for a guy like Matthew Golden because much like Xavier Worthy, he is someone who's not just about speed. He is someone who's about route running. But the reason I like Matthew Golden actually a little bit more as a draft prospect than, say, Xavier Worthy is because of that scheme versatility. He'll understand his role in this offense immediately, utilizing his abilities and intelligence to allow JSN to still be the wide receiver one, allow JSN to get most of the target share, but also be pivotal in the short to intermediate areas of the field where I think Sam Darnold will be able to thrive in this offense. So that's why Matthew Golden is someone I really like, especially considering how he's utilized in the red zone with Texas. I feel he's not just someone who can make the big play down the field, which I feel will have to be JSN's role in this offense, but he's someone with that short area quickness, that intelligence to get open, an elite route runner who utilizes his speed to great effect, and that's what makes him so dangerous, in my opinion, if he were to sail by Seattle. However, there are concerns about his injury status. Did deal with a couple of little things with his career at Texas, and I feel like as a shorter guy, can he consistently play through contact and thrive in the short and intermediate areas of the field against these big off-ball linebackers will be the question as well. And then a lesser concern, but still one that you might have to look out for, is that catch radius. He is someone who has made impressive catches, but I feel in this new look Seattle offense, there are going to be a lot of contested catches that you're going to have to win. You're going to have to go up against very elite corners in the NFC West week in, week out. And you're going to have to win those battles consistently. So can Matthew Golden do that with a very limited catch radius? Time will tell. But I do think he's going to be a talented enough player to where Seattle won't necessarily have to worry about him too much in terms of what he needs to do to elevate this offense. But the last player that I'm looking at in terms of who could be our prospective first round pick is someone that JSN is all too familiar with. Played with him for several years in college and may just be the perfect complement to this offense just because he knows JSN's tendencies as a receiver himself. Emeka Egbuka. Why not reunite these two guys, an elite wide receiver tandem in their time with Ohio State, and kind of do what that offense can do. Give it a more layered approach, more timing-based approach for a guy like Sam Darnold who thrives in the short to intermediate areas of the field, but is not, averse to going down the field. With Emeka Egbuka, you can balance out that approach perfectly. Emeka Egbuka, in my opinion, is the most intelligent receiver in this draft. He is someone who understands how his experience translates to the NFL, and I feel he can be super effective in the areas of the field where Darnold thrives, and the perfect complement, most importantly, to what Jackson Smith-Njigba can do getting vertical. He is a nuanced route runner. That's what I love. Both of these guys, Golden and Egbuka, are nuanced route runners. And what I love about Egbuka is that one of his weaknesses is that obviously he's not a speedster, right? He does not win with speed. But it's his change of direction, his ability to understand coverage to the point where he doesn't necessarily have to win with speed. That separates him from a lot of these receivers in the draft. And he's someone who kind of telegraphs the football into his hands. That's what I love about him. He knows where the QB is going with the football as soon as he gets out of his break, and that's what I love about him as well. But obviously, compared to Matthew Golden, he's not going to win with speed. He's also someone with a lot of injury concerns, battled a couple of knee and ankle things in the 23 season, and he also is someone who is someone going to be leaning a lot on timing-based routes, and physical press-heavy corners might disrupt that a little bit in the NFL. So how he translates his route running game to the NFL is going to be pivotal to how I view Ibuka in this offense. But all four of these guys, no matter whether or not, we do decide one way or another in which direction we're going in, I feel like can be difference makers for this offense. I still think Seattle are going to be in on a lot of players in free agency, but this is where the difference is going to be made for this team going forward in this year's draft. How we're going to build this team for the long-term future of the Mike Macdonald era. So that's what I wanted to address with this segment, and I hope you all enjoyed it, even though, yet again, it is one of my favorite teams we're discussing. But let me know what you think in the comments about any other teams with a lot of draft questions, and hopefully I get to do more segments such as this as we head towards the NFL draft in just under a month. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with another great segment.